to get to celebrate Shabbat with you and to welcome Shabbat together and to celebrate with Isla as she becomes Bat Mitzvah this weekend. So, tonight is just the beginning of all of the festivities where you'll get to kind of have all of your hard work really put into action, which you're no stranger to, really, as a performer. But as we all said all along the way, it's not a performance. It is really just about a step along the journey of all that you've accomplished and really being able to continue to be a part of our community and to take this step in this moment. So, hopefully you all have Sidurim, and we are going to start on page 4, and I want to invite the Broad family to come on up to help lead us and light our candles and lead us in the blessing for lighting our candles as we welcome Shabbat together. Don't hurt yourself. Asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen. Toda rabah. So as we light our candles, we bring a little bit more light into our space and into this time together. And so I invite you to just kind of breathe that in and allow it to kind of find a space within yourselves to enliven us and to bring even more joy to this moment and this Shabbat. Isla, I'll ask you to go on over, and the rest of you can have a seat. And as we turn to page 5, and Isla's going to lead us in Shalom Aleichem. And as we sing these words on Shabbat, we are reminded of this idea that on Shabbat we welcome angels into our midst and into our lives. And so we welcome them in. We can offer them blessings, they can offer us blessings, and then they bid farewell. And at a time like this, when you are celebrating such a momentous occasion in your family, it's also a time where we really get to welcome folks into our lives. And so we can acknowledge all of the angels that we have in our lives and all the forms that they take as they come from near and far as we celebrate together. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Boachem L'Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Barchuni L'Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Seichem L'Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thank you, Isla. It's fun watching the light move across the row here. Zevi, you're free now. the light. Now it's all on Lily. We continue our service on page 10. Yedid nefesh avarachaman mishuch avdach el ritzonach yarutz avdach kemo We turn to page 14 as we move into Kabbalat Shabbat, and a section of the service is meant to help us to get ready for this moment of Shabbat, to really be able to settle in, to allow ourselves to arrive here. Often we might find that there is a lot of busyness in our week, or a lot of things that are keeping us busy or occupying our minds and our bodies. And so Kabbalat Shabbat was an insertion that was put before our evening service to really allow ourselves to settle in. So as we get to page 14 for Psalm 96, we are reminded, the heavens shall be glad and the earth rejoice, that this is not just a happy time for us, but even for the world around us, for the natural world around us. And I want to ask all of you, as we are moving into Kabbalat Shabbat, it's also a time where we can recognize the joy in our lives, where we can recognize the weeks that have passed, so that we can really appreciate the times that we had. And so if there were particularly joyful or happy or exciting things that happened for us this week, it's a time where we can kind of think back and recall those experiences, so that we can hold them and hold on to them and allow them to find a place within ourselves, but also to be able to share that with one another. So I want to ask all of you if there was anything particularly awesome about this week, or highlights from the week, that you might want to share with the rest of us, so that we too can experience that joy with you.
I got to close on my best friend from growing up's house.
Wow.
A friend from when we were in 6th grade, and she sold her house in Chester County, and that was a good thing. Plus planning for this amazing.
Very exciting. Mazel tov to you and to them for on this sale. It's so special when the things that we end up doing as adults in our lives can kind of connect with the times that, the people who are important to us at other moments in our lives as well. So that is pretty exciting, and we're looking forward to all the celebrations with your family as well.
I hung out with a friend that I hadn't in a while, and that was nice.
That's great. So school's over now, so there's a little bit more spaciousness in our lives. So it's a great time to be able to see some people who we haven't seen in a while. And I don't know about you, but I have been feeling a lot of that in my life, that 222, thank God, we're in a different place than we were at another moment a few years ago where we didn't get to see people so much. And it was, I think you saw a lot of these people, but that was kind of about it, right, for a little while. Well, I hope you have much more of that and at the rest of the summer, Zevi. Anyone else have anything? Yeah, Carly.
Earlier this week, Zebby, Emily, and I went on a hike on a rainy-ish, humid morning this weekend.
Yeah.
And it was just really magical. We saw centipedes.
Scary.
Lily and I did. And like all these slugs. It was just really like, the forest was glistening.
Yeah, and it smells different. Yeah. I know. Often during those times when it's a little rainy, we might want to just kind of hibernate and not take advantage of all of the beautiful nature that we have around us. And it's nice to kind of force ourselves sometimes to get out there. My family went camping earlier this week, and we looked at the forecast, and it was first supposed to rain most of the time. We almost aborted the mission, and we've never camped with the kids in the rain before, and we just did not know how that would go, but decided to go anyway. And thank goodness we were able to set up camp. It did rain later, but it did not rain while we set up camp. And it also did not thunderstorm, which might have been scary. But it did wind up magically clearing up, and we had a beautiful day. But we did get to have that first experience of sleeping in the tent, having the rain come down, and the different sounds that happen when that, in those kinds of moments and experiences, to really hear the birds. There's some birds that we want to get a book of or something because we cannot figure out what on earth they were. But I am also feeling very appreciative of that experience this week of being out in nature in an unexpectedly beautiful time. Well, I invite you to continue to think about this question, to think back on your week, because it's, Shabbat really provides us with this opportunity to pause in our weeks. Otherwise, one day can just run into the next, 1 week can run into the next, and life can just pass us by. And so Shabbat is such a gift to be able to, even for a brief moment on Friday night, to pause, to think about the week, to think about what's coming up, to appreciate where we are, to express that gratitude, and then to move into Shabbat together. So please join us at the red arrow on page 14.
ישמחו השמיים,
השמיים,
ישמחו השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ותגל הארץ. ישמחו השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ותגל הארץ. Yeram hayam, yeram hayam, yeram hayam, umelut. Yeram hayam, yeram hayam, yeram hayam, umelut.
We continue on page 16 with Psalm 97, four lines up from the bottom in both the Hebrew and the transliteration.
Oy zarua latzadik, oy yishrei lev simcha. Oy zarua latzadik, oy yishrei lev simcha. Oy zarua latzadik, oy yishrei lev simcha. Oy yishrei lev simcha, oy zarua latzadik, oy yishrei lev simcha, oy yishrei lev simcha.
We turn to page 23. Hopefully we're feeling a little more settled into our space and into Shabbat as we get ready for Lecha Dodi. And I want to invite Isla to come on up to help lead us. And when we sing the words of Lecha Dodi, it is a reminder of the kind of excitement and anticipation that we're supposed to feel as we welcome Shabbat, just as we would a loving partner to the wedding canopy. And so hopefully you have a little bit of that excitement for this Shabbat, a break that's coming or celebrations that are coming, and we can harness some of that excitement ourselves. And I invite you to join with us as Isla leads us in Lecha Dodi. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat Adonai echad, u'shemo echad, l'shem u'tiferet v'litfilah. Lecha,
Lecha,
Dodi,
Dodi, Lecha, Dodi, Likrat Kala. Pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha, Dodi, Likrat Kala. Pene Shabbat nekabela.
Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki hi mekor habracha, merosh mikedem nisucha, sov ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila.
Lecha,
Lecha,
Dodi,
Dodi,
Lecha, Dodi, Likrat Kala. Pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha, Dodi, Likrat Kala. Pene Shabbat nekabela.
We continue with the second verse on page 25.
Yamin usmol tifrotzi, Biet Adonai ta'arisi, Al yad ish ben parsi, V'nismecha v'nagila.
Lecha, Lecha,
Dodi, Lecha, Dodi, Likrat Kala. Pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha, Dodi, Likrat Kala. Pene Shabbat nekabela.
I invite you to rise and face the door as we symbolically welcome our Sabbath Queen.
Boi v'shalom ateret ba'ala,
Gam b'simcha u'v'tzola, toch emunei am segula, boi chala, boi chala.
Lecha,
Lecha,
Dodi,
Dodi, Lecha, Dodi, Likrat Kala.
Pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha, Dodi, Likrat Kala.
B'nei Shabbat nekabela. You may be seated. We continue with the Psalm for Shabbat on page 28.
Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbat, Toled Adonai, Lezemer Shentay, Yeru Zakabur Kabul, Ki hine oivech Adonai, ki hine oivech Yovedu, Yitpardu kol po'aleo, ven v'tarim ki inkani, balosi b'shem ranon, v'dabit b'ni b'shurai, v'kamim elayim re'im, tishmana oznai. Tzadik atama yifrach, ke'eres bavanon yizkeh shetulim, baret Adonai v'chatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu. Seva neshenim verananim iulehayid yashar Adonai tzuri tzuri velo avlatavo.
We turn ahead to page 39 as we move into our Mariv service. And I invite you, if you're comfortable and able to do so, to please rise.
Baruchu et Adonai Hamavurach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Vaed.
You may be seated.
Baruch Adonai Machalam Shabur ומעביר יום ומבין לילה, מבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני זבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך את אדוני, המרי ורבים.
We continue on the top of page 40.
אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכבנו ובקומנו, נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך, לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו, ואורך ימינו, ואורך ימינו, ובהן נהיה יומם ולילה, יומם ולילה. ויבחר, זה ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל.
We turn to page 41, and I invite Ayla to come back onto the bima to help lead us in Shema and V'ahavta.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha
B'chol levavcha, u'b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol yodecha, v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele, asher anochi mitzavecha, hayom al levavecha, v'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, b'shivtecha b'veitecha, u'vlechtecha b'derech, u'v'shokbecha u'v'kumecha, u'shartam liot al yadecha, v'hayu l'totafot b'neinecha, u'mtaftam al mezuzot beitecha, u'visharecha. We continue silently on page 42.
Adonai Elohechem emet.
Continue on page 44 as we prepare to recite the words of Micha Mocha.
ומלכות ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ומרים בני ישראל חנו שירה בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם מי כמוך ואלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר וקודש נודע תהילות הספר מלכותך ראו בניך וכן לפני משה זה ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר יוודע אדוני את יעקב וגלום יד חזק ממנו ברוך את אדוני גיא ישראל.
We turn to page 45 for Hashkivenu, and it's an opportunity to think about all of the people and places in the world who can use a little bit of extra peace, security, and compassion in this moment as we say the words, Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, spread over us your canopy of peace. And we recognize as we say these words that sometimes we might be praying for something magical and outside of ourselves to be happening to kind of keep us safe and keep others safe in the world. And we're also reminded that sometimes we have the power and the capacity to be that force for somebody else. and to step in and to make a difference and to provide some safety and to provide some security. And so as we sing these words together, I invite you to think about those in your lives or those in the world, whether near or far, who might be in need of this canopy of peace to be spread over them, so that as we sing, hopefully our words and our prayers and our thoughts can kind of go wherever it is that they are needed in this world.
Ufros aleinu sukat, sukat, shelomecha, ufros aleinu sukat, sukat, shelomecha, Baruch Adonai, haborei sukat shalom aleinu v'kol Yisrael, Yerushalayim.
We turn to page 46, and I invite Ayla to come back to the bima as she helps lead us at the top of the page with the Shamru.
V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'doratam b'rit olam.
Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, oti le'olam, oti le'olam, oti le'olam. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'doratam b'rit olam. Sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim v'et ha'aretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'doratam b'rit olam. Uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat le'doratam b'rit olam. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'yamad divra kirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon, u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. B'gala, b'gala, u'v'zman kariv, v'imaru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach, Li'olam Li'omei Hamaya, Yitbarach, Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shemei Dekudesha, Richu, Li'ela, Min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma v'imaru. Amen.
We turn to page 47 for our Amidah, and as we move into the Amidah in our Mariv service, it is recited silently. And so I invite you to move through from page 47 to 52, either with the words in the Hebrew or the English, or to take this as a time to have an opportunity to recognize your own personal prayers as well. So I'll invite you to rise if you're comfortable and able to do so, and when you've completed your prayers, you may have a seat.
Yekiravi Gerashumi Rapa. Miamadi Vrakurte Vanlichmakude Vakayakaravi Vakarakaidako Be Israel Baga loves Magarivimaru. Amen Yaheshmira Mivarach. Yalam Liame Almaya Yitbarach. Yitbarach Fishtabach Fit for arbitrary to save it, arbitrary slash Medigrisha. Miela Mikopeka to Vishara to Tushbeka Vinachanmata Damia Ramil Mavimru. Amen. Take about Solon Honovio to Kuntuho Israel, Kodam, Avahonovish Mavimru. Amen. Heshlamara Michamai, Vachaim Elena Ko Israel Vimru. Amen. Ose Shalom in Ramav, Haya Ase Shalom, Level Ko Israel, Kushvidevel Viamaru. Amen.
So I want to invite you for a moment into this story and into the experience of our Torah portion this week, Baha'alotcha. So if you feel comfortable doing so, I invite you to close your eyes. But if not, that's okay too. And I just want to invite you to take a nice deep breath and imagine yourselves among the ancient Israelites in the wilderness. So we've been reading this story from the Exodus in Egypt to the wandering in the wilderness, the receiving of Torah at Mount Sinai, and all the steps that we've taken along the way. And so I want to invite you to imagine yourselves among that group of Israelites. So we have been camped at the foot of Mount Sinai for some time now, and we'll soon be setting out on our journey toward the Promised Land. The tribes are standing and ready to go in front of us at attention beside the Ark of the Covenant, the Mishkan, and Mount Sinai is now behind us. I want to invite you to notice the feeling of standing between these two very palpable reminders of God's presence, the Ark of the Covenant in front of us and Mount Sinai behind us. Slowly, the Ark begins to move forward, growing smaller as it moves off into the distance and further away from you. Finally, we can no longer see it as it moves beyond the horizon. Soon, we too will begin to move forward, along with all of the other tribes of Israel, as we too set off and follow that Mishkan. As we do so, you look back at Mount Sinai, the place where God spoke to Moses, the place where we witnessed God's presence, the sound of the lightning and the sight of the thunder, confusing way to describe it. And as we move, that mountain grows smaller and smaller. I want to invite you to take another deep breath and hold this image in your mind, in your heart, in your body, wherever you're feeling it, and slowly open your eyes. Okay. So this is the scene in our Torah portion, or one of the many scenes that we have. So for those of you who were kind of imagining yourselves in that, or just picturing what it might have been for them, either way, I want to ask you, what were you, or what might you have been feeling if you were one of those Israelites in that moment? What do you imagine might have been going through their minds or their hearts? How are they thinking? How are they feeling? Yeah.
I think a little mixed, like not feeling comfortable moving forward, but not wanting to be back, and
Yeah.
just uncertain of what's to come.
Good. So a little mixed, a little uncertain, maybe some excitement of where this might continue to lead. I mean, there's already been so much excitement in their lives, but surely, maybe a little unsure about that as well. Thank you. Does anyone have any different or other thoughts, or something that you were starting to feel or think in that moment?
You might be saying, are we there yet?
Yes.
Are we there yet?
Okay.
How much longer?
Right. So reading this also, and talking to Isla about this, she's going to talk about how we don't really know. Like, we didn't have a GPS to know, like, okay, well, we're leaving Mount Sinai and we're heading to this other place in the desert, and it should take about 3 days. So everyone, pack up your stuff, get ready for a 3-day journey, which we kind of like to know when we're going on a trip, right? Like, I packed for 2 nights of camping. I know what to bring. I'm going to summer camp, for 3 weeks. Like, what should I bring? So we usually have an idea when we do something like this, but most of the time it seems like the Israelites didn't know. The cloud lifted and it was time to go, but they had no idea when it was going to go down again. Would it be 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks? Who knows? Yeah. Any other thoughts or feelings or ideas? Yeah.
I think maybe relief. They just come through an incredible experience which they didn't know they were going to live through.
Yep.
And there was all sorts of natural things taking place. So the get me out of Dodge kind of feeling like I can get rid of that, I'm out of there, and let me get someplace at least I know that I'm not going to have a mountain that might come alive and come after me.
Okay. So there's already been so many miraculous events that they have experienced from Egypt to this moment. God willing, things could be a little calm from here on out. Maybe we can just have regular life, which I think we can sort of feel in a different way of the last couple of years of who knows what things will be like from one moment to the next. God willing, we could all have a regular summer, whatever that means. It's been a while since we've had one of those. So yeah, maybe some relief to say like, okay, that was interesting. Now what? Okay. So I want you to continue to think about that, okay? Because this scene is part of what's happening in this week's Torah portion. But it contains within it both themes and, in the Parsha, both themes and textual features which make it among the most unique and powerful sections of our Torah. In the short verses that describe the scene that we just experienced, we encounter something that appears only once in the entire Torah, in the entire 5 books of Moses, and only twice in all of Tanakh. The other place is in Psalm 107. If you were to take a look at this week's Parsha in the Torah, you would see something like nothing else. Do you know what I'm going to say? There's 2 inverted nuns, the letter nun, that show up in this Torah portion sort of like brackets around verses chapter 10:35 and chapter 10:36. Our rabbis teach us that no word or letter is wasted in the Torah scroll. So even sometimes when it seems like something is repeated incessantly or more than once, and we say, well, we already know that. Why is that here again? Our rabbis teach us that nothing is wasted, so there must be a reason why that's there. And surely there's something that we can pull out of that. And that there's worlds of meaning in every word and every letter that we find in Torah. So if that's the case, then we must ask ourselves, what's the meaning behind these seemingly extra, and not just extra, but upside down nuns that the scribes have been recording over and over again for centuries? So this wasn't just one person's mistake that, oops, I added these extra little things in there, but it's something that every Torah has, no matter where you are. So we learn in the Talmud that we're meant to understand these 2 mysterious Hebrew letters are there and included in the text in this very curious way in order to signify that these 2 verses, and also the other 2 that are represented in the book of Psalms, believe it or not, actually represent their very own book of the Torah. So this would bring the total count from the 5 that we have, typically, up to 7. And so there's a verse in Proverbs that says, wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. In Judaism, 7 carries a really special significance. It's the number of the days of the week, 7th day being the day of Shabbat. It is a day of rest. And so with that, 7 really comes to represent the peace and tranquility that we experience on this day. And kind of a completion also, if we think about it in the context of creation, that it wasn't until Shabbat was created that that entire project was complete. So according to the book of Proverbs, it is built with 7 pillars, 7 books, and not just 5. And so we somehow needed these 2 extra places, these 2 extra verses to get us to 7. So there's something that must make these verses even more special than even just having these nuns around them. So tomorrow when you sit down in the morning, I invite you to look through your Chumashim, and you can turn to the page where we find these verses. And you might find that the verses in Hebrew are familiar to you. As our Shabbat and weekday services were canonized, this part of our liturgy, or this part of our Torah, became part of our liturgy. And it was brought into our Torah service and is something that we chant, or that many communities chant, every Shabbat morning all over the world in preparation for removing the Torah from the ark. It goes like this. Vayehi binsoah ha'aron vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha. So we don't always know where the words from our Siddur come from, but most or many of them were not just written by some creative rabbi once upon a time. A lot of them come from Torah. And then the following line after that, Shuva Adonai Rivavot Alfei Yisrael, is part of the liturgy in our Siddur when we return the ark, and when we return the Torah to the ark at the end of the Torah service. So we have these two brackets in our Torah service where we also take these verses from Torah and we bracket our entire Torah service with them. These words were the start of a prayer that Moses would recite each time the Israelites needed to pack up their camp. So that moment that we just described of getting ready to leave behind wherever we were and go on to wherever it is that we were headed. We didn't know where it was. We didn't know how long it would take to get there. These are the words that Moses would recite each time the Israelites needed to pack up their camp and journey forward toward the promised land in their roundabout way of traveling, as it were. Once the Israelites crossed the Sea of Reeds, God came to them as a pillar of smoke or a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And it was only when that lifted, could be day or night, and when that happened, it was Moses' cue that it was time to mobilize the community to continue their journey. And there's also this elaborate shofar blowing that happens that we've also learned about in our Torah portion that signifies different things of it's time to go, it's time to pack up, it's time to do all these different things. This means that every time we sing these ancient words from Torah at the start of the Torah service, that we also then become part of this chain of tradition that began with revelation at Sinai, that invited us to rise and to get up and go on from that point, and that we too are being asked to somehow get up and go and do something amazing in our lives, to bring forth Torah into the world, to somehow move ourselves ever closer to either the physical promised land or some promise of something that is a perfected world before us. So the words of Moses' prayer that prepared him and the entire people for such a powerful and important journey are significant. And so I want to just break them down a little bit so that we can really understand the choreography of how the Israelites traveled in the wilderness. So each time the cloud lifted, Moses would call out these words, communicating the next steps to the rest of the Israelite community. With this prompt, what would happen is the Mishkan, or the Ark of the Covenant, would start its journey, which is why it was kind of going away in front of us while we weren't yet marching. So it would start its journey toward the next destination. The rest of the Israelites, in that moment, they didn't follow for about 3 days. So they would, during that time, they had a lot of work to do. They had to break down their camp. They had to pack up all of their own personal belongings. They had to, prepare all of the animals that were with them, all of the other things that were there. Like, there were over 600,000 of them. That's it took me hours to set up a breakdown camp for my family of 4 earlier this week. I could only imagine what it would look like to do that for 600,000 people. This meant that once Moses called these words, God and the Mishkan, that pillar of where they were headed, had already left. This meant that when Moses called those words, God was like, that reminder of God's presence was somewhere in front of them. And then they marched after it. So maybe God was still dwelling with them, we hope, protecting them. but probably leaving them with a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of unknown, as we mentioned, as they were hopefully maybe still feeling that connection, but also maybe feeling a little unsure. Like they were even sort of chasing after God in that moment, kind of, wanting to pack up quickly and run after that Mishkan. So I do imagine that there is probably a lot of anxiety that happened in that moment. No wonder we're an anxious people. As they even, at times maybe it was hard to see where they were going. Are they even heading in the right direction? Could they even see the Mishkan? Could they even see that cloud anymore? And did they know if they were going to be protected on their journey? So to understand the fullness of this experience and the lessons that it might offer us today, I want to take a closer look at the verses of Moses' prayer and this little new book that we have in our Torah. So the first verse translates as, advance Adonai, Kuma Adonai. May your enemies be scattered and may your foes flee before you. A good thing to say as you're heading out on a journey. You want to keep yourself safe. And the key word in that is in the very beginning, Kuma, which means get up. In other words, get up and go out into the world. Leave where you are, go somewhere else. As we embark on each journey, we pray that God will scatter our enemies, that God will diminish or erase all external forces that would make our journey difficult. And we know from Torah that these words aren't meant to just be magical, but it is as if Moses is setting an intention and sharing a hope for him and for the entire people to really have a safe journey. It's like when we say Tfilat Haderech, a prayer for journeying or traveling, that many of us might still do today, especially if we take a big trip. We want to pray for safety, that we'll go and that we'll return. So the second verse is often translated as, and when it, meaning the ark, halted, Moses would say, return Adonai, Shuva Adonai, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands. The key word in that one is the Shuva. Each time the Israelites set out for their camp, Moses prayed that they would safely arrive and that God would then return to dwell among them. So right now God's somewhere out there, but God willing, as we settle, that cloud, that fire kind of settles among us and we can really be in tune with God's presence once we start setting up camp again. Abraham ibn Ezra zeroes in on the second half of this phrase, and he notes that the grammar in the words Rivavot Alfei Yisrael are often translated as Israel's myriad of thousands, but that there's some grammatical inconsistencies with that. And instead, he chooses to translate it as restore Israel's, not as restore Israel's myriad of thousands, but restore Israel to tranquility. So in this moment of settling down, of possibly, hopefully, allowing that anxiousness to dissipate, that what we're actually saying and praying for is to return Israel to tranquility. For Ibn Ezra, what we receive here is actually a beautiful teaching about living in community. And when he translates these words as tranquility, he's highlighting that when mobilizing the entire Israelite community, we must not only be concerned about external threats and foes that might come to us from the outside, but we also need to kind of look within and make sure that we're taking care of one another, because that can also be difficult and dangerous, and people might need help along the way. It can be hard to herd thousands of people. It can be hard to herd 2 children. It can be hard to herd thousands of people. And we already know that they have a tendency to kvetch, which they do a lot of in this week's Parsha. And they are going somewhere where they don't know where it is and how long it's going to be. And you can imagine how many are we there yet might be coming along the way. And if not more than any external threat, that's something that they need to kind of be attentive to as well. With these words, then, we're imploring God to keep us as one people, whose relationships with each other can remain tranquil and can remain peaceful and can remain strong. Alan Marinus, who's a contemporary teacher of Musar, which is a Jewish ethical tradition for spiritual growth, he notes that tranquility is not a state of numbness. Rather, the ideal is to remain conscious and balanced in the midst of whatever might be going on within and around you. When things are going well, it's easy to remain calm. But when things get difficult, you tend to get a little stirred up, and things can be a little turbulent. So what these 2 commentators have taken together kind of point out, and what they're teaching is that despite the complexity and diversity of the Israelite community, despite the fact that there are those among us who might have stronger dissenting opinions, despite what's sort of coming to us from the outside, that we will not let these differences manifest as hatred among us, and kind of break us down and break us apart. Instead, we're then praying that this diversity should serve to bring us together and strengthen our community. When we read the word kuma in the first verse, a student of the Baal Shem Tov teaches that this is one way to serve God, which is by actively engaging in prayer and study and good deeds. And through all this good work, we then have the ability to merit so that things will go our way and that we'll have, positive things come back to us as well. And that we might be able to bring our Torah and values out in the world and kind of perfect the world in a special way. And the word Shuvah in the second verse represents an indwelling of God, which reminds us that by being attuned to the divine spark within us, that we open up the possibility for the divine to also work through us. We know that just as the Israelites had to discern their path as they marched forward, following the Mishkan toward the Promised Land, that we also, in our lives, have multiple pathways for seeking God, for understanding how to live as a community, to figure out what the next steps are, whatever our journey might be, and to pray that we can do that while also kind of maintaining that state of tranquility. There's a promise of redemption that continues in this Parsha and in Torah that doesn't need to just be something that happened once upon a time, but could be something that we can always be enacting in our lives as we make positive impacts on the world around us. And God willing, we can find ways to be inspired in our spiritual practice, to embrace one another, the diversity of the world and our community, so that we can also bring that tranquility out into the world. So Moses' prayer, these two verses that are found within these little upside down nuns, and that now we know where they come from when we encounter them in Torah, they contain a very concise and powerful methodology of how to bring Torah from Mount Sinai into our lives and with us into the future. To bring Torah into this world, to be partners with God in the process of revealing Torah's meaning for today, we need to be both externally and internally focused, and we need to kind of hold both of those at the same time. And so my blessing for all of us is that we can always remember to get up, kuma, as our Parsha encourages us to do, so that we can create a more perfected world, and that we might merit divine favor through the act of pursuing knowledge and justice and peace, and that we can also remain connected to that sense of Shuvah, of our own inner spark, of that tranquility, of that inner compass, so that we can acknowledge and value the diversity and beauty that always surrounds us as well. So I hope that next time we encounter those words in our Torah service, that we can kind of hear them in a little bit of a different way. I was talking to someone about one of the prayers recently, and they said, I kind of just sing them all the time. I don't always think about what I'm saying, nor do I know what I'm saying. So it can be nice to take a moment here and there to pause and really kind of break down and understand where some of the words of our liturgy come from and what they mean. So I want to invite us to return to our service and invite Isla to come on up to help lead us in Kiddush. We can turn to page 55. Just leave that here for her to grab.
No.
You can bring it over there. There's no flat surface over there.
Now come here. There we go.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Pray peri agafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho v'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit, ki hu yom techila lemikra'e kodesh, zeher l'tziat Mitzrayim, kivanu v'acharta, v'yotanu kidashta, mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha, v'ahava uvratzon, hinchaltanu,
ata Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Amen. You could just put it back on the middle table if you'd like. We turn to page 56, and I invite you to rise for Alinu.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, latet gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kigoye haratzot, velo samanu kamishpachot ha'adama, shelo samchachenu kahem, v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam, va'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol ha'aretz, v'yom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shmo echad.
You may be seated. We turn to page 58 for Mourner's Kaddish, and we remember those in our community who have passed away recently and those who passed away at this time in years past. And this week in our community, we observe the yard sites of Harris Blumberg, Charles Braun, Henrietta Abe Daniel, Albert Elson, Morris Fishman, Jack Greenberg, Lester Kaufman, Joseph Eliezer Klug, Harry Lowenstein, Harry Mann, Edith Nieberg, Annette Redder, Henry Schwartz, Hyman Scheinberg, Martin Spivak, Mark Boraski, Isidore Breckman, Florence Drayman, Morris Fetter, Gloria Gordon, Amy Kahan, Jack Kelman, Rose Lewine, Richard Lowenstein, Mary Matisow, Solomon Isaac Ratzker, Aaron Richmond, Rebecca Seidenberg, Samuel Solomon, and Harry Weisberger. I invite those who are in mourning or who are reciting Kaddish to please rise, along with all those for whom it might be your custom to rise in support of the mourners, or for those who have no one to say Kaddish for them. Yitzkadal, v'yitzkadash, shemei rabbah, v'alma divra kirutei, v'almlich malchutei, v'chayechon, uv'yomechon, uv'chayei zechol beit Yisrael, v'agala uv'izman kariv imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'olam olamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal, shemei dekudasha brichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran v'yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlomo rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates peace for us bring peace to all Israel and to all who dwell on earth, and we say together, amen.
Amen.
One service down, Isla. Tomorrow morning we come together again at 9:30 to celebrate Shabbat morning and to celebrate with Isla as she is called to the Torah as bat mitzvah. And I will be here both in person and on live stream for those who might be looking to join us either way. And as we close our service tonight, we want to end with the priestly blessing, which is you can find on page 75. So there's a tradition to recite these words every Friday night for parents to offer these words to our children. They actually just came up in our Torah portion last week. So again, words that come from Torah that make it into our regular practice and liturgy. And so whether you have loved ones nearby, if you want to, feel free to hug or snuggle them, or whether you want to think about some of your loved ones that are out there in the world so that you can send them these blessings in this moment, I invite you to join with us if you'd like.
Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmarecha.
May God bless you and protect you.
Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha.
May God's face give light to you and show you favor.
Yisar Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom.
May God's face be lifted toward you and bestow upon you peace. Ken yehi ratzon. May it be God's will. Amen.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbos.